Hey everyone, I have a confession to make. I am secretly a Jinteki fanboy. When I was creating my set of sparring decks, which you've probably heard more than enough from me by now, the one deck that I had the most fun building by far was the Jinteki PE deck. It had a bit of a personal touch in it. I don't think anyone else would even think of playing our good friend Violet level clearance in Jinteki, but it just worked so well. It was such a good idea. It's a powerful card, and it synergizes with your rush strategy, the breach domes that you're running. I fell in love with it, honestly, and I think it's quite a pity that no such deck exists at a competitive level throughout the game's history, even though most of these cards have been around since forever. If you think about the other sparring decks I've made, there are similar analogs to them in the competitive scene, such as the Haley and the CTM decks that I built. But this one, I really wish it were competitively viable. I won't go into the reasons why it's not, but since it's so fun to play at the tier 2 level, I decided to take it on myself to bring this to the next level, the tier 2 level. As we all know, Violet level clearance is an amazing card. If you're any sort of a card game player, or you would know that drawing 4 cards is always a powerful effect. So building around that, we are going to try to make this an awesome Rush Jinteki deck. But before that, I'd like to say a bit about why I did not attempt to optimize my sparring decks. Some of you asked in the comment section, what would you do to adapt these decks to fit in the competitive meta, i.e. outside of the curated sparring meta? Honestly, my answer to these people asking that is that you should try to improve the deck yourself, instead of always asking me what cards should be swapped, how I would improve it, because honestly, watching me deck build isn't really gonna help you nearly as much as if you tried to build those decks yourself. And that does not hold a candle to actually playtesting the decks that you built yourself. I know it's time consuming and everything, but that is by far the best way to improve at the game. Not just watching someone rambling about deck building. You need to build your deck, and more importantly, go out there and play some games. Only by falling while playing games, only by failing, will you know why cards are bad and know why you shouldn't play certain cards, or why you should play certain cards because they're good. So with all that said, I'll now dive into the deck building aspect. Perhaps this will give some guidance for players who are less familiar with deck building. So from the original PE deck, you'll notice that it was a grail Jinteki deck, and well, that has to make way because, as I said, I want to optimize this deck. I want to play 3 copies of the draw 4 card, so that costs a lot of influence. We have to get rid of the grail ice, which is not the worst thing in the world, because with the large card pool we have now, there's enough adequately good replacement ice for the grails. The agenda suite switches up as well. I think one thing that people are too cooped up with as well, especially when playing Jinteki, as fun as it is to plink at the runner to deal net damage, ultimately it is not your only win con. You need to actively score agendas in order to have the best shot of winning, and that is something I outlined in the guide video for the Jinteki sparring deck as well. I felt that House of Knives tends to be a pretty awful agenda in this regard because it encourages you to do the wrong things, i.e. not score and just sit back and hope that the runner runs to their death, right? That you kill them with House of Knives net damage. Well, that's not going to happen against most good players. So instead, we are going to run Brain Trust, which increases the match point pressure if you can get up to 4 or 5 agenda points quickly. It also allows for a much smoother scoring plan. You can score 2-2-3, 2 points followed by 2 points followed by 3 points. Whereas with House of Knives, it's typically really awkward. Typically you want to go 1-3-3 House of Knives into 2 3-pointers, but that's very, very awkward. Scoring 2 3-pointers is very difficult. So this is why I chose Brain Trust. And because of the choice of Brain Trust, we are running fewer agendas. Personal evolution becomes a lot less good because the runner will typically only need to steal 3 agendas to win. So we're gonna play Palana instead because money is good. Right, what about the upgrades? price sec is by and far, I wouldn't say by and far, but it is pretty much superior to Hokusai in most regards. In fact, I think I made a mistake in the original sparring deck. I should have used price sec instead of Hokusai grid, because it's just on a higher power level. It is stackable with itself, meaning that you can potentially stack an unreasonable amount of damage on your scoring remote. It also induces extra tempo loss. The runner is forced to clear the tag, otherwise the resources might be trashed. And also, it does not die to polyop. This is actually quite important. Hokusai grid requires you to res it before you can deal the net damage, and there's a window for the runner to use political operative. Price tag, on the other hand, is on access, so even when unres, it will still do damage. So yeah, price tag is just better. I have no idea why I use Hokusai over price tag. I guess thematically Hokusai grid makes more sense in Jinteki, but really it should be price tag. Another thing I changed is the Ben Musashis are no more. Now this could be a bit controversial, but this goes back to the deck building aspect and why I don't like optimizing sparring meta decks for the wider normal Netrunner format. The reason is because Ben Musashi inherently, while a very good card, dies to Film Critic, making it such that your deck is now too reliant on the runner not having a Film Critic. Otherwise, your Obokatas and your Ben Musashis, two of your most powerful net damage cards, are blanked. And that is really, really awful. So instead of running those cards, we run cards that are... Well, we still run Obokata, of course, because it's really good. But instead of the Ben Musashi, we're going to run SNARE, which is a lot less avoidable because it's an ambush. Runners don't really have good ways around it right now. So SNARE is the card of choice, and while it doesn't protect our agendas the same way that Ben Musashi does by being a defensive upgrade, it is good for a different sort of playstyle. We now play Jammy Jinteki, where we jam never unadvanced cards in the remote and taunt the runner into running them. They have to run them, otherwise they could concede 2 agenda points if it's a brain trust. Or if they don't run that turn at all, it could be a double shipment from Tenin into an Obokata. That would be nasty. So we are going to play sort of a Jammy Jinteki style deck where they get punished if they run the remote at the wrong time. And to supplement this, we have a really niche card here, Psychokinesis. I didn't try to, jam this card into the deck. It just seemed to make the most sense. The problem with my agenda suite as it is that oftentimes I found that I had a scoring window, but no agendas to score. And that is a no-go, because this is a rush deck at the end of the day. Psychokinesis is Jinteki's fast track, because it allows you to dig through your deck for the agenda you need, even if it's not in your hand. The problem with actual fast track is that you are forced to review the agenda, which basically destroys our defensive game of, is it a brain trust or a snare? Right? Our Jammy Jinteki game is no more if we show the runner that we are installing a brain trust. So Psychokinesis gets around that. You get to keep the mind game, yet it could be anything. It doesn't even have to be a brain trust or a snare. It could be your defensive upgrade. It could be a 5-3 agenda. It really could be anything. And it's very hard for the runner to convince themselves to run it, knowing that there could very well be no agendas on the top 5 cards of your deck, and it's just a trap or an ambush. So all that being said, this is the final product, the refined Jinteki deck. I wouldn't say this is something that you play in place of the sparring PE deck. That can stay in the sparring meta, but this is something more suitable for the wider meta, the normal Netrunner, in my opinion. Oh yeah, you might have noticed, new ice, huh? You look at the barrier there, our favorite Chiyashi. This is gonna be a real nasty treat, and this is why this deck is running so much money. You see there are 3, 6, 8, 11 economy operations, and we are still running an economy ID on top of it. That's because we are hard resing the Chiyashis. We need all that money. So enough said, let's get into a showcase game. As you have presumably seen my sparring Jinteki deck in action before, I'll focus more on the gameplay and strategy here. This is an incredible opening hand. It has lots of ice, which is ideal for rushing out early, bolstered by the 4th piece of ice drawn on the mandatory draw, and it has the all-valuable violet level clearance in it. Now, usually, against Shapers, you tend to leave HQ open, because you want to dedicate all your ice to the scoring remote so that you can extend your scoring window for as long as possible. However, in this particular scenario, I do not want my opponent randomly running my hand with something like a Dirty Laundry and killing my violet level clearance. It's only one to trash. We cannot have that happen. So I draw into an agenda, which leads into a very easy play here of play ice, play agenda, violet level clearance, exactly 5 cards at the end of the turn. I could have put the ice on the remote instead, however Fairchild 2 is much more suited for R&D. I decided that my opponent was probably going to play very passively here, judging by the turn 1 piece in our time. It's kind of a read that I'm making and trying to guess what the deck is about, and the U-Backs confirms it. This is a late game chaos theory that does not intend to run at all early game. They want to set up their engines, set up their breakers, and then, you know, just completely lock the remote late game. So I need to abuse these opening turns, which this scoring window of which could close as early as turn 5, to get to match point. And again, this is where House of Knives is less good than what I'm doing now, which is to score the Philotic for 2 points, and then what I intend to do next turn, score the Brain Trust to get to 4 points. 4 points is kind of good because it's kind of threatens match point with Obo Carter as a 3-point agenda for the win. So that's where I want to get to at least. And my opponent drops the Magnum Opus. So yeah, the setup overhead is very high. The U-Backs and Mopers cost a lot of money, but their early piece in our times really help them get it set up. So all they need now are breakers, one of which is already in the bin in the paper clip. So right now I'm planning out my turn. I have various options. I'm definitely going to install ice on the remote and play the Brain Trust, but for my third click I could either play IPO or play the price sec to protect the Brain Trust. I went for the IPO here for 2 reasons. Firstly, I needed the economy to rest the DNA tracker on the remote. Secondly, I did not think my opponent would be able to contest my remote with 0 breakers on the board. Judging by the fact that they're ditching all their breakers in the bin, it doesn't seem like they're running an SMC deck. Fem in the bin telegraphs test run scavenge, right? So you wouldn't really play Fem in an SMC deck. That's very expensive to install. So based on that, I don't think my opponent would dare run server 1 without an SMC on the table, because I could inflict easily some nasty net damage with Komino or DNA Tracker. So they are not getting their breakers installed, so I can easily get a Brain Trust squad, which is why I don't need the price sec for double protection. I would rather have the price sec in hand, so that on a future turn I can bluff the price sec as another Brain Trust and induce a run on server 1. So that is some tactics behind that. If I put the price sec out now, my opponent would know it's an upgrade after I score the Brain Trust, so they wouldn't run it. So that's my intention behind that. And as for the Breach Dome in my hand, I'd rather have it in hand or in archives than to put it in the remote. It's not very good bait, it doesn't do a lot of damage. We continue getting more reads of our opponent here as they continue ditching a bunch of cards, including a London Library. That is a very interesting ditch. It tells me that they are on some sort of deck that bounces lots of Fems around. So I need to be really careful about scoring any future agendas. The scoring window has closed. My opponent is bloody rich. They have 5 clicks per turn. From now on, they can easily contest my remote. So all these ambushes are going to come in key. While they might have access to breakers, they do not yet seem to have deflection for damage. And that is a department I can tax them on. It seems like my win route is going to be luring them into an ambush, dropping them below their max hand size, and then attempting to push out an Obo Carter the very next turn. Also note that the restricted card is Magnum Opus, which means they cannot be running Film Critic, as it's also a restricted card. This means I have a lot more leeway, or rather this really pushes me towards an Obo Carter victory. That is clearly my line of victory right now. That is, if I can find an Obo Carter. Well, speak of the devil, there it is. The Obo Carter is now in my hand. I could have installed Advance the Obo Carter this turn and hope for a shipment from Tending Victory, but if I advance something, you'll be sure my opponent runs it, and even if they don't, they are going to run some other server. I was not confident giving up a big 3-point agenda without another Obokata to follow it up, for sure. So this is why I decided to lure them in with the snare in server 1. It seems like they're ready to set up a remote run with the Guardian Blade, and the FEM install confirms that. They test run for the FEM. I was thinking they were gonna FEM the remote so that they can challenge the card inside, but no, they went for HQ legwork instead. This was absolutely brilliant. I did not see this coming. I thought for sure they would run the remote over HQ because, you know, they were telegraphing that they had breakers by installing the Guardian, by having FEM in the bin, and also, yeah, so I got the signal that they were ready to contest the remote, which is why I put the snare in the remote. But clearly, Obokata in the remote would have been better because it would have been safe from this legwork. I got really lucky here. My opponent missed the Obokata, a 40% chance. They killed the price tag from my hand, which means I can't use it anymore. But they do... The Obokata stays safe. That's the most important thing. My opponent gaining 3 points from the Obokata isn't the worst thing. The worst thing is losing my win condition. I need to score this Obokata. So now it's my turn. My opponent's on 3 cards in hand. Can I install double advance here? I don't think I can. My opponent has FEM and Guardian Blade out. They use a scavenge to stick the FEM on the table. And you see there's another FEM in the bin. So this confirms their London Library shenanigans. Yeah, they're just going to bounce FEMs around the table. My click one here is draw. I'm not sure what I'm drawing for here, but I find a brain trust. It's something, I guess. Well, I'm just going to put the Obokata in the remote where I believe it's far safer than in HQ. My opponent is now threatening same old thing legwork, and I do not want that to hit me and potentially have them get to 5 points since I just drew the brain trust. So, you know, putting my eggs in separate baskets here. Meanwhile, as you can see, my opponent's FEM targets R&D. So, again, this telegraphs to me that they are far more interested in contesting R&D than either my HQ or my remote. So hopefully this will distract them enough as they spend a valuable click and money getting through the server only to find a Kakugo there. They are not going to break the Kakugo even though they have the paperclip because that would cost them a card from the hand. Instead they run archives trying to find something, but it turns out they were trying to trigger notoriety as my breach dome damage snipes the notoriety from them, and because of that, yes, they were not able to successfully get the notoriety off. That was what my opponent was trying to go for, and they failed. So because they took too much damage on their last turn due to the breach dome, and because they played the feedback filter from their hand, now was a perfect time to strike. I was gonna advance the Obokata and protect it with a price tag, I believe. So this is a nice play because even though I can't score the Obokata normally, if my opponent doesn't run, I outright win with shipment from 10 in. And if they do run, can they challenge the remote? This is going to be really tricky. I'm not going to res the Komainu here because they just play a Hunting Grounds that neuters it. The on-encounter effect, meaning Komainu doesn't have subroutines. They are going to break the Guardian Blade, and I realize that my opponent is locked out. Because it's a price tag in the remote, if they steal the Obokata here, they will lose all the cards in their hand and then die to price sack. Oh dear. So my opponent accesses the Obokata here. If they steal it, they lose because they will hit the price tag. They chose not to steal it very smartly because they knew I was running price tag. Remember the legwork? They trashed a price tag from my hand. They knew I was playing price tag, and when I did not res the upgrade, they knew for sure that was a price tag. So that was good play on my opponent's part, but they've still failed to score the agenda, so I'm going to score it instead. I'm going to play my money card, and I'm going to fortify the remote with an ice they do not have the breaker for. Chiyashi. Well, they do have a paperclip, but are they really going to install it and spend, what, 7 credits to break it with paperclip? I don't think so. Nothing barring a stim hack run would work, and even stim hack is a game ender for them because stim hack deals damage, it takes a card from your hand, and they still need 4 cards to steal the Obokata. So stim hack is definitely out as a win condition. The only way my opponent was getting through this is if they somehow managed to get a double fam on the remote. They needed to scavenge the fam onto the Chiyashi and somehow get through the DNA tracker. So I think that was incredibly unlikely, which is why I felt this was a very safe scoring window for me. Not to mention that I had exactly 15 credits. This was why I trashed the Komainu before installing the Chiyashi. With 15 credits, I can rest the Chiashi this turn and then score the Obokata next turn exactly with 0 credits to spare. My opponent attempts to thwart my winning attempt. Obviously, they know it's going to win me the game if they don't run it, but they got stopped short by the Chiashi, which they had no way to break. Chiashi is an absolute MVP here, even though it's declining in popularity. In this super rich Palana deck, I can afford to res it and then score the agenda behind it. It's so good because people just don't expect the sheer number of credits needed to break Chiashi. And it definitely saved my bacon this game. In conjunction with DNA Tracker, which, even though it was femmed by my opponent, well, they needed 2 fems because this DNA Tracker absorbed the fem so that the Chiashi could fire out in full force. Now, my opponent obviously takes 4 net damage here, but I didn't bother with it because advancing the Obokata just wins me the game anyway. If there was one game-changing moment the entire game, it had to be the turn my opponent went for my Obokata score. If you notice, on that run, they had 1 click remaining. That click, they could have spent the second last click to draw before running, thereby accessing the Obokata and prize tag with 5 cards in hand. They would have survived the run, and they wouldn't have to worry about Neuro EMP either because they had feedback filter installed. So, I mean, yeah, usually running last click is not good, but my opponent really should have here. Another thing they could have done was to not install so many cards. Had they not installed the Hunting Grounds, for example, it would have been interesting. I think they would have been able to get through the entire server and survive, because if the Hunting Grounds was in their hand, they would have 1 more click to click Opus for money. They would have 1 more card to absorb the price tag damage. So I guess this is a showcase of why it is not good to play too many cards from your hand, especially against Jinteki, because every card you play is a click wasted, and more importantly, a card depleted from your hand. On the flip side though, my opponent made an incredible call to go for the legwork. If I were in that position, 9 times out of 10, my fem would have been directed on the remote instead, and I would have gone for what was the snare. But my opponent read me like a book. They went for the legwork, which was absolutely the correct play. And had they sniped the Obokata on that run, it would have been a completely different outcome. I was joking after that. If I double mind read my opponent, my ideal play would actually have been to put the prize tag instead of the snare in the remote. Then I would have both snare and Obokata in my hand, making it very difficult for my opponent to steal the Obokata, knowing that they might hit the snare on a future legwork access on that HQ run. So that was really funny. That was a very interesting interaction. We were both trying to out-mind read each other. I think my opponent outplayed me in that instance. They just got unlucky with the 40% roll on the HQ run. So yeah, this game was all about reads, and I guess that's something you kind of expect when going up against Jinteki. For my side, the most important thing was identifying that my opponent was on a slow deck, one that excels late game but plays very passively early on. Telltale signs of this include classic, setup cards like Peace in Our Time, which prohibits you from running for the rest of the turn, and expensive cards like Ubex and Magnum Opus, which incentivize you to, spend clicks clicking the Magnum Opus instead of actually running. On my opponent's side, their legwork was a huge information revealer, as they saw my price tag and knew not to steal the Obokata that would flatline them on the Obokata price tag run. Of course, they still lost in the end, but they averted flatline in that instance, and that could have changed everything. So yeah, I really love this deck, and from this game, I hope, and from my enthusiasm, I hope you can tell that this deck is a lot of fun. I don't promise it to be competitive. I promise I make no guarantees if you bring it to your local store champ. But if you want a lot of fun with Netrunner, I'm sure you're having a lot of it right now. If you want even more fun, try this deck. It is fast, it is furious, and most of all, it plinks the runner. As an added bonus, if you're participating in the Sparring Decks teaching league, I'm sure you have lots of chances to play with and against this deck, or at least the Jinteki P version of it. As always, thanks for watching and happy net running. Goodbye.